All right, go. We're live.
Okay. Welcome everybody that may be watching in, and hello Board of Education and those that are participating in this particular event today. So we have to begin today's meeting with establishing a quorum. So if Tricia Zarevich is there, she can go ahead and start that process.
Board President Carl Palestrini.
Present.
Board Clerk Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Member Annette Eustek.
Yes.
Board Member Todd Weaver.
Yes.
Board Member Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now we would need a motion to adopt today's agenda.
Motion to adopt the agenda? Oh,
What?
second.
We have a motion and a second. Tricia?
Board President Carl Palestrini.
Yes.
Board Clerk Sarah Hines.
Yes.
Board Member Annette Eustek.
Yes.
Board Member Todd Weaver.
Yes.
Board Member Tess Arthur.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. At this point, we will conduct a Pledge of Allegiance, and Tess Arthur will lead us in that event.
I'd be happy to. Hand to your heart. I pledge allegiance to the
To the
flag
flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tess. Okay, the audience is notified that the open session of this agenda today is audio taped. Okay, at this point, we're at item 2 on our agenda, and that would be public comments on the agenda items. And we would refer again to Tricia Zarevich, our administrative assistant, to the superintendent to go ahead and let us know where we are with that.
We did not receive any public comments for today's meeting on this topic.
Okay. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead with our agenda item, which is actually discussion, information items, and planning. Item A, planning for the 2020-21 fiscal year budget. I'm just going to go ahead and open that up a little bit before I turn it over to Yvonne. And again, good afternoon, and thank you everybody out there for joining us, those that are interested. The purpose of the meeting today is for the business department to present the status of the budget to date to the Board of Education. This is a process that we do periodically throughout the year, and it serves as keeping the board up to date with current financial status of the district. Members of the board today will likely ask questions regarding clarifications of the data. The discussions regarding a response to that data is actually scheduled to proceed at the regularly scheduled board meeting on May 20th. Again, the purpose is to become familiar with the budget to date. Plan to join us on the 20th as we move forward with next steps. Chief Business Officer Yvonne Perez has prepared a well thought out and comprehensive presentation that clearly illustrates our current status and next steps. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Yvonne. Yvonne? Okay.
Yvonne, we do see the screen, but you're still muted and no video.
Correct.
There we go. I finally got myself unmuted. I
go.
couldn't find my little box that lets me do that. So I apologize for that.
No problem.
So here I have the agenda listed here, and we're going to go through this as quickly as we can and to save time and allow the board plenty of time to ask questions. This is intended to be interactive, and I will try to pay attention if you're trying to talk and stop talking. But this is obviously a little bit of a different environment. So we'll all just give each other some grace as we try to make this work. Mm-hmm. So I want to thank you for allowing us to schedule this meeting. You know that we've been having a rapidly changing financial environment on a daily basis. We are getting updates from our different advisor groups and from the state as well. And it felt that we needed to quickly inform the board about what is happening. As we discuss planning for the 2021 fiscal year budget, we must always bear in mind the impact our decisions make to our educational program, and that must always remain at the forefront of our minds. So here at the beginning of this, I provided some information on the current economic outlook at the point that this was prepared. Yesterday, the governor's May revise was released. I'm not prepared to talk about that. I did look over the document, but I need some more time to really unpack it and receive some information. But essentially, the May revise is saying that LCFF districts, which we are not, we will be somewhat impacted by the state's budget. That schools that are LCFF districts are probably looking at a 10% reduction in revenue. So we'll keep that in mind. I've also provided some information here from the Department of Finance and little brief statements from the Legislative Analyst's Office that have been providing information or their latest updates on the state of the economy and what that looks like for the state budget. So we need to plan, we do need to plan ahead for lower funding. I think that is the takeaway from all of this, is that funding is very precarious right now for school districts. And even though we're a basic aid district, we are not immune from that. Community funded districts or basic aid districts will be less impacted in the immediate time frame from shortfalls in the state budget, but we still receive funding from state funding, state categorical funding. We get to enjoy that funding, and we do receive also a small portion of our revenue from the LCFF calculation. I would like to mention on this bullet right here that the Monterey County Assessor's Office is projecting lower than normal increases to our property tax. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the property tax in just a few minutes. One of the things that we were advised as well, as we're preparing a fiscal year budget, the state requires us to prepare a multi-year budget. And so we are always asking the assessor's office, what do we expect in terms of property tax revenue going forward, even further than 1 year into the future? What does it look like 2 years into the future and a third year into the future? Because that's what we're required to look at. So he advised that the assessments, I'm sorry, my voice is scratchy. The assessments for fiscal year 2021 have already been established. And so that we can expect, he's expecting a 4.5% to 5% increase in revenue in this calculation. But for the 2 years out, 21-22 and fiscal year 22-23, that he would project a 0% increase in assessed value. So that directly affects us as we plan forward in terms of we have zero control over how revenue comes into the district, but we have all the control on how we spend those expenses and how we expend that money. And so that's where this becomes vitally important, that we begin some very immediate conversations and start involving all of our stakeholder groups, our employee groups, bring in some parents and try to figure out strategically and together, collaboratively, how are we going to go forward into the future with these financial triggers that we're starting to see right now. So I would like for you to keep that in mind as you begin thinking about this over the next week or so. How do we also not just plan for fiscal year 2021, but also plan for 21-22 and 2 years out? Sorry, just a minute. Right. So the property tax revenue, I've provided a property tax revenue and history for you. And this is a chart that the board has seen in the past. This comes to the board every January. Unless you have some very specific questions, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, except to point out a couple of things. There is a method for us projecting our revenue. a long-standing true and tried method that's always worked. And so when we received our April revenue, we take this to the board in January to give you an idea of what we're projecting. When we received our April revenue, it came in much lower than we had projected. And I felt like I had already prepared a somewhat conservative projection for the January. Well, and so when the April revenues came in, we still had to project out, two more months, May and June. So we did that. But basically, from the January projection we had prepared to the April projection for the April revenue that actually came in, we're now projecting that will be an $819,000 decrease in revenue than we were projecting in January. So that gave me some immediate concern. I put a little bit of an analysis here for you to see. One of the things that we look at the change in how the assessed value is affecting our collections and the delinquencies of taxes that come in. The good thing about taxes for us is that eventually it does come in. So it's a time issue of how soon is it going to come in. The assessments are set and they don't go away, but people don't always pay their assessments on time. And it can take several years for those assessments to come in. So it is a cash flow issue. Spent some time with the Auditor Controller's Office, really delving into this because it was such a significant change. After our conversation with the Auditor Controller's Office with the county, she indicated that because we had reached out to them and there was such a significant difference that they are going to look into it more fully. When that information may come back to us, I do not know, but I was happy to hear that they are going to look into that. They also felt that it could be a cash flow issue, that we actually will see those funds come in and those allocations that come in May and June. And so that is still to be seen. All right, so now I'm going to display a graph that shows the property tax revenue. And there's several things on here, and I'll see if I can make that a little bigger. This is a really nice summary of what's been happening in the district over the past many years. So this is going back all the way to fiscal year 02-03. Across the bottom is the enrollment. And then we have our projected enrollment for the current fiscal year, because that doesn't get finalized until right about now. And then also a projection of enrollment going forward. This enrollment is different than you saw in December when we reported enrollment to the board. And it's because we have more information now. Enrollment changes constantly. And so this is a more up-to-date projection than we've provided in the past. And across the top here is the actual dollar value of the revenue that comes in each year. So you can see what's happened on this red line. This is the percent increase in revenues that the district has received over many years. And back in the earlier years, we can see that we were enjoying, anywhere from up close, anywhere from 8% to 10% increases in our revenue coming in. And during those times, and rightly so, we invested those dollars towards our instructional strategies. We hired more teachers, we hired more support staff to try to make sure that we're providing the best educational program that we can. Well, then the recession hit, and you can see where our revenues came way down as a negative. Actually, there was a negative 4% decrease in our revenues. And from that time of the Great Recession, which I think that as we're moving forward, all the predictors are that this recession that we're in right now will be even worse than the recession we experienced in 2011. So those are all factors that we have to consider. But we can see that we started to recover. The recovery got better, but nowhere across this graphical illustration, we can clearly see that we are not at the levels that we were in those earlier years. So the assessed values, there could be different reasons for that, but they have not reached the levels that they reached in the past, nor the increases to those values have not increased like they were in the past. And so that directly affects our revenue. And what happened when those April revenues hit our books, and it was a true anomaly from what trend would have shown in the past. is that our revenue is going down from the previous fiscal year. And I'm projecting just a slight increase in revenue for 2021 because of the information that we've received from the assessor's office. Now this is all a projection, and we don't know what will exactly happen. It could be better, it could be worse, and revenues are not finalized for the fiscal year until the fiscal year is complete. And so we get our final, we know what it actually is by June of every fiscal year. So a year after we prepare the budget. Do you have any questions on this graph?
No.
Okay, hearing none, I'll move on. So in preparing this presentation, and whenever we prepare a budget projection, we build that budget based on assumptions. And so the purpose of a budget is to try to predict what we're going to need in the future, and also try to predict those revenues. And so, as I mentioned, a budget is built on underlying factors and assumptions. And unfortunately, when we started talking about the budget in January, and we were having discussions with our schools and with our principals and other individuals, the January budget that came out of the governor's office was a pretty picture. And so we thought we were going to have a lot more than we had that is actually going to come forward. So some of the assumptions that we've had to modify quickly here will be presented. So I provided information about enrollment. We can see that we have 2,458 students projected for 2021. Once again, that has been modified. Provide some information here on our English language learners. We also have redesignated fluent English learners that also need additional supports. Our free and reduced students and our special ed students. Now we're predicting that our special ed enrollment is going to actually be higher than this for next year. And so you're going to hear a very short presentation from Steve a little bit later about the challenges that we are facing from a special ed perspective. All right, so one other point I want to make here is on number 1 here is that we're projecting a decrease of students by 33 decrease, but our special ed enrollment is increasing. We also just this recently became aware that Unipero is closing. That's located in our boundaries, and so we don't know what that holds for us as well. But what it does mean is that we might have some additional students that we're going to have to budget for, but there are not additional revenues that come in for additional students because we are a basic aid district, and so we are not funded on ADA.
Yvonne?
Yes.
Just a clarification on Unipero. It is Unipero Sarah Elementary School, K-8, that is located at the Carmel Mission. And it's been in business for 75 years, and it's all of a sudden closed its doors. So I just wanted to kind of identify a little more clearly which school it is.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
But it is something that, could affect us that we don't know the answer to yet. And so those are some of the challenges as we're trying to plan a future budget.
Hey, Carl, do you know the enrollment over there at Unipero, Sarah?
The enrollment of that school is somewhere around 200 total students on their best enrollment numbers that I've seen. It is private, it's Catholic, and I think Yvonne's point is pretty good. We don't know how many of those students are actually residents of Carmel, because it is a tuition-based school, and there's a likelihood that a high number of them don't live within the Carmel Unified School District. But until we, see what the ramifications of that closure actually is, Yvonne's making a good point. We could see some numbers increasing.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, then I'll move into the revenue assumptions. And so I explained just a little bit earlier about how we make those revenue projections. We do always confer with the assessor's office to see how they are going to set assessed values, because that affects us, how much we get in revenue. So once again, that was set at 4.6% above the current values. The LCFF revenue is going to remain static, but this could also be affected by the governor's budget. It was not clear if they are going to allow basic aid districts to still enjoy that hold harmless. So this is a figure, $1.6 million, that has not changed in years. It was a hold harmless amount that was provided to basic aid districts, but unique to every basic aid district based on a formula. We're not sure if that will result in a 10% decrease or not. That's still to be seen. Shortly after the governor's budget comes out for the May revise, they will do a calculator revision, and that's when we'll be able to see how we're affected by that. In the budget that you're being presented to today, it removes some one-time grant revenue. One of the things that was in the governor's budget was some reductions to categorical programs. Some of them are being eliminated and others are going to remain flat, when in January we thought we were maybe going to enjoy some increases in those categorical type fundings. And so just to be extremely conservative, we remove those type of funds from the budget until we have an actual award amount, and then we add those back into the budget when we know what those are. None of these funds have people in them, so it's used to support other sorts of things that relate directly to the purpose of these funds. The special ed funding flows through the SELPA that we get from the state. So with that, Tumai put together a revenue budget, and it shows the actuals for 18-19, the operating budget based on second interim, and also based on the revenue change that we became aware of in April. But other than that, it is not projected expenses at this point in time. So we're still working on that. So those are the assumptions for the operating budget for the current 19-20 operating budget. Some slight changes from second interim when we presented that report to you at that time. And then there's the column for the 2021 budget. And so when you look at the totals, you can see that we have increased in revenue. That our revenue is going up, but as we move through this presentation, you'll see how we quickly use that increase in revenues. All right, so then I'll talk about expenditure assumptions. So as we build the budget, we have some assumptions that we use as well. We will have vacancies that have to be filled, and so as we budget those vacancies, we do it with a certain strategy here. We also had settled negotiations with both of our employee groups. And so there is a 2.5% increase in salary and a $500 improvement to health and welfare benefits as previously negotiated. So that is in the budget. And for health and welfare benefits, we also included an 8% increase projection that benefits would possibly go up in January, and typically they do increase. And so that will remain to be seen. We will not know that information. Usually we have that by September. All right, so moving on to STRS and PERS. So this is one of the big costs to a school district. And the state in about a year ago, they did put some funding towards pensions for schools, for both STRS and PERS. PERS is for all public employees. STRS, of course, is for certificated staff only. But what you can see is that the STRS rates, they started messing with this a few years ago, and we knew that the STRS and PERS rates were going to start going up when they had remained pretty stagnant for a long time. So you can see that the rate from 16-17 was 12.58%, and in 2021 it's going to 18.4%. For PERS, it was at 13.8%, and we will see it going to 22.7% for 2021. I will give you more of an update on Wednesday when we have the board meeting on Wednesday on the governor's budget. There is some language in there that possibly they will buy down some of this rate increase. So what that looks like is to be seen. and maybe something that we will be able to get into the final budget. When I say final budget, it's just a budget. But we may have more information before this goes to the board for full adoption. The point on
Yvonne,
this is,
Yvonne, I have
yes.
one question about, so obviously just as you're seeing a constant rate of increase, is that also, you know, while what you're talking about is potentially, you know, ratcheting that down a little bit, but is your assessment that it's just going to kind of continue to climb, or have we reached a cap and now we're at the plateau? So can you kind of speak maybe just to the information you have available to seeing what that looks like? Because obviously that rate of increase is staggering.
Right. It is slated to still increase for, I believe, a couple of more years. I can give you the exact answer to that on Wednesday because I need to double check my memory on that. But I believe it is continuing to ratchet up just a little bit in the future years, but not too many more future years.
Okay, yeah. So then if in that research you can find out that what is the expected plateau,
Okay.
so that well, that would be very helpful to me.
Okay.
Can I just add something to that question?
Mhm.
And it's a very good question, Todd. They only have given a certain many years out of these increases. They are not expecting a plateau at this point. They are kind of holding that they weren't really sure. And that was pre-COVID. So it is likely that actually where they were hoping to, you know, start catching up with all of this, that point of time is going to be much further out than they expected. They only give a few years in advance of the increases for the STRS and the PERS, and then they readjust every so often throughout a year, both the current year, or not the current year, but the future year and the ones further into the future. That will likely, what they said, although this governor would be paying, what's happening is this will not plateau anything. The governor would actually be paying our portion of it. So it's likely that with the recession, from what I've heard, that it will go up maybe even more steeply. So that's unfortunate.
To piggyback on what Annette just said, I just read today that there's a redirection of $2.3 billion to CalSTRS and CalPERS. So that could really affect that percentage as well.
Right. I think that's what Yvonne was talking about. But in the future years, even there's no end in sight, and actually they're expecting that it will be worse. So
yeah, can I throw a comment in here too? You have to remember that both of the funds are different. PERS is much bigger than STRS, and it includes all kinds of public service workers, and they may not move commensurately, and they probably won't, because it depends on the condition of each of those funds. So I think it's fair to say that we don't have a real good, the one I'd be more concerned about is PERS, because of the issues with the funds that they currently have versus, you know, where they are versus STRS. So they're different, and I'm with Annette. I don't think that there is a ceiling on it, and I think that they're going to have to adjust contributions from employees and the district as they see fit to try to get to those funds to be stable. So there you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that information, Annette. That's helpful. One of the things here, and I guess the takeaway from this is that it's still in flux. And so as it changes, I will continue to update the board as those kinds of things change. But if you look down here on this gray column here for the totals, you can see that for every dollar that we pay in certificated salaries, that we also have to contribute 22.10% of statutory benefits. What's different between STRS and PERS are obviously the rates, but for certificated employees, we also do not contribute the 6.2% of Social Security. So that's why you see a difference here.
Right.
So for in the green here, you can see that the classified, for every dollar of classified salary we pay, we have to contribute 32.6% of statutory benefits. So Carl, just to clarify something you said, one of the PERS is a much larger pension, but it also is an area for school districts where it generally is where we have lower amounts of salaries as compared to the salaries that we have for STRS. And so that's kind of a helpful thing, but it also is a pretty large percentage. So I put together a graph. And so this shows how STRS contributions have increased over the years. And, basically it's more than doubled over several years. Wow. And so that is really a challenge. When you think back to that earlier graph I showed you on the amount of revenues that were coming in the earlier years, it was, and at that time, the rates weren't changing constantly like they are now. And so it was much more sustainable. But now when we have that little chink downturn in how much revenues are coming in, our ability to sustain becomes more difficult. And so here's a graph of the PERS contributions, and it's even more steep. It even has a steeper curve than the STRS. And so you can see that that also has more than doubled over the past few years.
Got it.
Okay. All right, just really briefly on the other parts of the budget are supplies, services. So we have salaries, benefits, supplies, services, capital outlay, and other outgo. The principals are used to hearing us refer to these as 4s and 5s because that's where their site-based budgets are placed. And so they have budgetary control over these areas on how they spend their supplies, how do they purchase services, things like that. And so I just put some assumptions in here. I won't go over a lot of that. I will point out that there's a 12% increase for our liability insurance. It doesn't result in a great big huge increase, about $33,000. We have $596,000 that's built into this budget that you're seeing. Once again, this is a draft budget and the board's first look at the budget. So it's a draft and things can change. But we have added $596,000 of ongoing costs. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. Actual cost for special ed. So we have our special ed contribution. We receive providing special ed services to our students in need is a federal requirement, but the federal money that comes in does not begin to support the cost of educating some of our special ed students. And so we refer to this as a contribution from the general fund to support special ed services. And so that is going to increase $685. What's in this as we move through this presentation is we have some added positions that we think are worth considering. And so those added positions have been built into this budget. And so some of that increase is due to that. Some of that increase is also due to STRS and PERS, the salary increase and the increase to benefits. So that, for the employees that are employed for special ed services.
I think, Yvonne, you said $685. Just those that may not see the screen, it's actually $685,913.
That's correct. Sorry.
That's
yeah, I do that sometimes, leave off zeros.
Not a problem.
So please correct me when I do that. So here we have some other things that come straight off the top. Straight off the top, they're required. They're required. We don't have a choice. And so this table shows you what we refer to as contributions from the unrestricted general fund to restricted resources. So restricted resources are resources that we have to use for a specific purpose, as opposed to unrestricted, we can use for any educational purpose. And so the state requires us to put aside a 3% of our total general fund expenditures to maintain our facilities. And so you're seeing that the contribution for 2021 will be almost $2 million. It's $1,986,000. And the contribution that I just talked about for special ed is $6,184,000. So total contributions right off the top going from unrestricted to restricted of $8 million. We also support some other programs in the district. So the difference between a contribution and a transfer is contributions remain in the general fund, but they're going from unrestricted to restricted, and transfers are actually transferred from the general fund to other funds. And you can think about other funds as maybe a different bank account, for example. And we track all of those kind of revenues and expenses in its own fund. And so there's several of those funds that we use to track certain components of the district. And so this is some of those. So these typically you would want to see these programs being self-sustaining, but they are not. And that's not unusual in a basic aid district just because of different parameters. But we provide, yes, go ahead.
These are programs that we have to support from the general fund. Wouldn't transportation be one of the bigger ones that we are supporting in terms of recapturing the costs, of doing business with our transportation because of the size of our district? Would that be included on this list at a fairly high amount?
So Carl, in some districts, they do it that way. They move it from unrestricted to a restricted resource. And Carmel, we do not. So those transportation costs are tracked by an account code, but they are not moved into a restricted resource.
Okay.
But you are absolutely right that transportation is a program that we also support. And it's not cheap.
No, it's at a high level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have adult ed, you can see the amount there. Our child development is almost self-sustaining. But one of the things that the district chose many years ago was to provide a discount for child care services for our own employees. It's a great benefit for our employees. But if we discounted that, the program would be pretty close to being self-sustaining, which is what we want to see. And then the Cafeteria Fund is very difficult for a basic aid district to run in a positive or run in a positive manner, just because of the low amount of free and reduced students that we have in our district. It's at about 17%. In some districts that have higher percentages of that, the reimbursements from the federal government and from the state are much higher. And so we're not able to take advantage of those. And so to run that program, that's what it costs us. And then Fund 67 is our other post-employment benefits. So these are our retiree benefits.
Yeah.
And so the total of those transfers out are $1.5 million. All right, then I've provided, just like you saw in the revenue, here's the expense side based on those assumptions we just talked about. And once again, it's really nice to see what was the actuals in 18-19. This has once again not been adjusted since the second interim. You will see that at budget approval, what our estimated actuals are. And then we have the draft budget. So when we scroll down here, we see, it looks like.
Yvonne, can I back you up just 1 second? I want
Sure.
a little more detail on the cafeteria. So this is after the 17% or so you said reimbursement, that this is how much we're funding for all of our food services. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay, so this is I sort of have just a general question about it, is that, we charge for services, but then we also, offer free and reduced for, so this is the shortfall of the amount we're charging. So this is all at the end of the day, even though we're charging for certain things, we're still in the hole. So if that's correct, then the area that can be at least discussed or considered is what amount are we charging, and is that the appropriate amount? Am I correct in that line of thinking?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
And that is something that I don't know how long ago the district looked at what we were charging for full pay students that don't qualify for a free breakfast or lunch. And so that would be an area that we could look at more deeply. Do we need to change the rates that we're charging?
Yeah, I think, Todd, it's safe to say that the district has always taken a position of affordability for students, and partly to get them to use the services that we provide. But I think at the same time, it's very difficult to maintain a food service program that breaks even. I don't know of many districts that actually do, because it's a pretty complicated formula, but I think your inquiry to there is certainly valid.
I just wanted the facts behind what that number actually means,
Right.
and now I have it. So
That's the loss. That's the loss leader you're looking at after all the contributions.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question on that cafeteria fund as well? How much monies come from free and reduced? Like, what's the what's the estimated dollar amount that comes into that fund? And where is that noted?
You know, Tess, can I bring that to you on Wednesday? Because I don't have those
Absolutely.
figures
Yeah,
off the
no
top of my
problem.
head.
Yes.
Yeah, if I would have in my previous district, but I'm still wrapping my mind around, you know, getting really involved in what the exact numbers are for our district.
No problem.
I think, Yvonne, you did allude to the fact that we're at about the 17% level of recapture from the government on this, because we have so few relative, you know, our numbers are pretty low in terms of being able to recapture any of these costs.
Right.
That's kind of a segue into, you know, some idea of how much we actually do get back on our services percentage wise.
Right. In many districts, if you have a high percentage of free and reduced, you are able to run your program in more than a break even. When I say that, you earn enough profit from the federal reimbursement on a high percentage, district that has a high percentage, where it does allow you to not only operate at a break even, but at a point where you can also sustain equipment replacements and enhancements to the program. And so we don't have that here.
So, Yvonne, one thing I think that would be helpful for me when we're moving into, you know, follow-ons to the future would be comparables to other districts, right? So obviously you're bringing up, you know, the percentage of what is provided from the federal, but then the other thing I think would be helpful is how free is defined and how is reduced defined, to see if there's well, just then we have, so I have that information, because then, you know, if we look at it, comparables to other districts, and obviously basic aid, you know, versus LCFF would be great. But in the end, what I'm after is to see, is that an area that can be realistically evaluated? Because it's.
Yvonne, can I respond to that real quickly?
Sure.
You're not going to find a comparable district to Carmel, and it doesn't have to do with basic aid. I don't know of another district in the state that's trying to deliver food to 640 square miles of a school district with only 2,500 kids in it. You see, the cost of doing business with food services is very similar to the cost of doing transportation. And the example would be Pacific Grove, that has a similar enrollment, slightly less, that's transporting kids 2 miles, as opposed to Carmel, that's transporting them 640 possible directions in terms of square mileage. So I think, Todd, the issue for us is the way we are configured brings about a high level of costs that most districts don't have, because of low enrollment, long distances, and all of the stuff you have to do to prepare those services. So I think the comparative analysis is going to be difficult to get, because you're not going to find a district that looks like we do. And I think,
I don't mean by district. What I'm referring to is just percentages, right?
well, you did say districts, and so that's why I'm
so
to that.
Sure. Okay. What I'm after at the end of the day is I'm after to see, are there districts, and what do they operate on with their cafeteria budget? And, you know, when we're talking about percentage of free, percentage of reduced, right? And then what is it that we charge? Because if we have comparables of what other districts charge, then we can look at those numbers to see, are we within reason, or is it something that we're out of whack?
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I understand what you're asking for, Todd. You're basically asking for an industry analysis, more or less, and that will just take a little bit of time to put together.
Sure.
But I would be very happy to bring that to you within the next month or two. Would that be okay?
Oh, it's no problem. That sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. And I will tell you that Pacific Grove also is a basic aid. We're the only two in the county that are basic aid districts. And even though, as Carl mentioned, and Carl, I thought that was an excellent point, they do look different to us in terms of square miles, but they also do not operate in, they also are not operating a profitable program.
No, but the cost of doing business for us is extremely high because of the logistics. That was really my point.
Right. Yes. And it was an excellent point. And one that I wouldn't have thought of right off the top.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so then we move into the expenses. I started to explain that. When you look down here at the bottom, you can see that our expenses increased from, this is actual expenses in 18-19 is this first column, 58.5 million. We have budgeted expenditures of 66.2 million right now. I fully expect when we are finished with our estimated actuals that this will come down, and that traditionally does. And then it looks like we're decreasing in the next fiscal year, but this is because we have removed some of those grants that I was talking about earlier. Okay. So then I'm going to lead you towards this the fund balance is the next thing on the agenda here. And this is an area that should be of great importance to the board, because we do need to really pay attention to this. And so the state requires a school district of our size, and it varies between the size of your school district, but for our size, they require us to put aside a 3% of our 3% of our funds towards economic uncertainty. But the board also adds 2% to that. So we put aside a 5% reserve for economic uncertainty, which I think was an excellent decision at some point in time that occurred. But we also, as a basic aid district, per board policy, we also maintain a basic aid reserve, and that's estimated at 11.1 million. So as we look down at this table, I'm going to explain it just a little bit. So you can see the most current past history, and you can see in dollars what we were reserving. And I have an estimate for 1920 because 1920 is not complete. And of course, we're projecting out for 2021 based on the assumptions that we're presenting in this draft budget. So here's your basic aid reserve here at 5%. Here's the additional basic aid reserves that we most certainly need to continue. And so we have a total reserve estimated for 2021 of 14.3 million, almost 14.4 million. And so that sounds like, wow, that's a lot of money. But it really is only 2 months, a little more than 2 months of operating expenses. We run anywhere between 5 and 6 million every month of operating expenses. So it's a 2-month reserve. And so while people might think that is, in my mind, it's a huge amount of money, but when you put it into the context for the school district, it is a good reserve, but it is not an out of line reserve either. And so the reason that districts have reserves is because it allows us to dip into those reserves when we need to for exactly the situation that we're heading into. And so it gives us some time to plan. And if you look at this last column, and this is our reserves as a percent of total expenses, and that's why you're seeing the total expenses here. So it is a function of total expenses. That's how you calculate the reserve. You'll notice here between 18-19 and 19-20 on the combined to ending balance here that it went down. And the reason that it went down is, if you remember, we did have some reserves at the end of the year. And so we moved some of those reserves to Fund 40, which is our capital outlay fund, to do some targeted facility projects. And we'll briefly talk about those broad projects in a little bit. But and so it's okay to dip into your reserves when you're strategically doing it and you have a reason for doing it. And it also maintains our reserve level that we wanted to see. And we know that we need to do some work on our facilities. So we were strategically planning that. When you look between 19-20 and the estimate that you have on this draft budget, you will see that it will dip further. And that's based on the assumptions and the additions that are being presented with this budget. Do you have any questions on this?
No.
Okay. All right, moving on. Of course, our budget has to align to our LCAP and the state. The only thing I'm going to say about our LCAP right now, because you have had presentations from Blaze and the results of our goals throughout the year from different departments. And so the state has extended the deadline for the LCAP, and normally you have to adopt the LCAP at the same time that you're adopting the budget. But they've extended that deadline to December 31st. I have a little typo here, sorry, to December 31st. And so that will be presented to the board at that time. Budget requests. So So this is where we're getting to the crux of what's in the budget. We did some work over the past few months with our principals, and as we were having those meetings with our principals in our groups, that there was some things that came out where, because of the work that's done in the goal areas and tracking data, it became very apparent that we needed to provide some more focus on special ed, English learners, multi-tiered system of supports or intervention, and student wellness and behavior. And so that's what you're going to see, some of those. And what quickly came to the top was special ed. And the reason special ed came to the top is because the increase in special ed enrollment. And Steve's going to talk to you about that in just a minute. So as we go forward, with all of those requests, you're going to see that if we do everything that I'm presenting to you in this budget, we would actually have to dip into our reserves. We would be in a deficit spending situation of $2.1 million. So I'm going to spend just a second on this and then ask Steve to talk to you about special ed. So the increase in revenue from one year to the next ends up being $1.8 million of additional funding that we're projecting will come into the district. This is a guess. It could be higher, it could be lower. And it's really, usually we could guess pretty well, but with this COVID-19 disaster, it's much more volatile, in my opinion, in terms of how close can we get to that projection. So it's kind of a scary situation. But once again, it could be higher, it could be lower. Well, where did those dollars go? So as I mentioned earlier, we have on line item 1 here, we have to account for the 2.5% salary increase for our certificated staff. And so this is a contractual obligation. And so that amounts to $586 million. The 2.5% salary increase for classified is $227 million. The
$1,000.
It's thousands, yeah.
Yeah, Yvonne, thousands.
I'm sorry, I'm messing up zeros again.
You were scaring
I'm sorry.
me.
Yeah,
Yes,
right. Yeah, messing up by 3 zeros. Yeah.
Yes, 3 zeros. The $500 increase to health and welfare results in $383,000. And yes, those other figures I said were in thousands, not millions. The step and column increase accounts to $434,000. And what that means is if you look at our salary schedules, there is a progression for employees to increase their salary, and it's called step and column. So the more education they get and the more years of service they get, their salary goes up. And so that we have that every year. And so that is $434,000. The STRS increase that we talked about earlier is $503,000, and the PERS increase is $523,000. Workers' comp is increasing, the rate is increasing slightly, but it accounted to $145,000. And then the liability insurance increases at 12%, resulting in a $33,000 increase. So just those, I wish I had put a subtotal on this so you could see it. So you're just going to have to bear with me here. If I subtotal all of those contractual obligations, it's over $2 million. It's almost $2.7 million. And so that $2.7 million against the additional 1.8 we have coming in puts us automatically at a deficit of close to a little over $900,000. And so just to meet our contractual obligations with the projected revenue coming in, we would be in a deficit spending situation.
Yeah, maybe Yvonne, when we get the discussion going on the board meeting next week, we can get a breakout of contractual dollars versus request dollars, and how those look different between the total, so the board can realize that, you know, if it's contractual, we're obligated, and what is the actual request amount. So maybe by next week. Okay.
Yes, I can do that, and that would have been a clearer picture. I agree.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate
it. So some of the things that we are initially requesting are in the area of special ed for the most part. So we can see that we're requesting a 1.0 FT increase for a special ed teacher, a 0.4 at the middle school, an intervention, a little bit of intervention for Captain Cooper Elementary School, a 1.0 special education instructional assistant, and you can see the cost of that, and a 0.4 speech and language pathologist. And then to support girls sports, a $3,000 stipend for a girls lacrosse stipend for a coach there. The other thing that we're going to take a little bit of time. So I would like to have Steve talk to you, give you a brief presentation about the reasons that we're asking for an increase in special ed, and so that you're well informed. And then also have Paul, because the last two items on here are related to technology, and Paul is going to give us a brief presentation about why we need to consider those increases as well. And then we'll come back and revisit this table. So if we can make Steve active so he can talk through special ed, that would be helpful.
There we
Hi,
go.
hi, thank you for having me on. Can you see me and hear me okay?
I see you and hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Yvonne, for sharing the information and bringing me on board to share with the board today in regards to the request, specifically around special education. I just want to back up a little bit, because one of the things coming into the district, still only my second year here, but one of the things that caught my eye were the core values that were actually not only conceptualized, but implemented amongst the staff in the district. And being specific, what I mean by that is really around inclusive models and co-teaching. You go around different areas around the state and you hear a lot of the conceptual descriptions of co-teaching and inclusive models, but you really don't see it being implemented very well. So that's one of the things that we appreciate here, I think, in the district, and one of the things that we want to continue to sustain. So with that, that's part of the reason why the district and at the high school and middle school specifically we're requesting or are requesting the additional staff is really to sustain the co-teaching model. You can see at the high school line item 9, the 1.0, what we're finding is over time from 16-17 to the present. In 16-17, we were at around 191 students in the district. In 17-18, we were at 195. And then at 18-19, we were at 222. And at 19-20, we were at 265. And with the matriculation moving up, what we're seeing is really a theme and a bubble of students that do have significant needs that are coming up through the middle school to the high school. As we see the students moving through the system and as we continue to support them, we are seeing that there is a bit of area of pause where we're thinking about how do we sustain the co-teaching model, how do we continue to implement. What we want to do is we want to stay below the 30% threshold when we're in a co-teaching classroom. And what we're seeing with the increase of the students is that we have gone above that threshold. So in some cases, it's even becoming to around 50%. And so when that happens, it really impacts the fidelity of the co-teaching model, in that we're not able to individualize and differentiate and have the students access to the interventions that they need, whether it be math or reading and so forth. And so that is really the essence of the request for the high school, along with the aid. In addition, what that would allow them to do is to really broaden their sections so that they're able to provide both the co-teaching and chemistry, and also establish a basic life skills and history class, so that they provide more options for students with significant needs. Because there's a focus and the expectations, which rightly so, is to really have all of our students move through the A through G system and to receive a diploma. We want to be able to expand on that and to be able to allow all students succeed. And so that's why we're also looking at the basic life skills and the history class to allow more options, to allow them to succeed and reach their full potential. So in addition, when we look at the middle school as well, it's very similar to the high school where we have a number of students that have matriculated up with significant needs, and we are looking at an additional section where we're able to support students in the co-teaching math as well as the study skills class, while also maintaining the appropriate levels to support them. And so again, these are requests that we really feel are to sustain the co-teaching model, the inclusive model. Right now, we also have staff that are really doing their best, and I want to acknowledge the staff on the front lines and the work that they do, because they're going above and beyond. Some of them do have 0.2s, and they're doing everything they can. And so that's really the essence of the request. In regards to any questions?
I've got some. Am I there? Steve?
Yes.
Okay. A little more data I think would help the board next week in regarding this issue. I hear you say that some classes are as high as 50%, but I think the average would be good for us to know as well, in terms of averaging, because we do the same thing with regular ed classes, with advanced placement and things like that. What does the spread look like? It might also be helpful for us to know how the inclusion is impacting the workload, as opposed to the program that we had prior to this, where it was much more of a pullout or a separated program, not a lengthy presentation. But the other thing too is, we're all sympathetic to this, I can tell you right now, but the last question I would have is the timing in terms of adding another staff with what looks very much like not a clear opening of school. We are going to probably be in a distance learning mode in the fall, and to add that level of staffing, how would that be used in that model? Because the kids that are really kind of losing out, I think, are the resource kids, because they've lost the inclusion process. They're not able to be in the classes with regular ed kids. So I think to define some of those things, what would the plan look like if we were to add somebody at this point? How would that person be used? And just some things like that, I think, would help us point us in the right direction.
Thanks, Carl, for asking. You stole about 9 of my points. So the last one, which I'm going to just add as a specific thing, Steve, is the percentage growth that you talked about, 160 to like 260 or something, right?
Correct.
Having that, not just the data point of what that is, because that's obviously very helpful, but then also to try to project. Are we expecting similar increases? And obviously the follow on to that is, if so, why? Is it because we're just awesome and we're doing such an awesome job that we're having people come here because of that reason? And then and this sort of relates to an earlier question, which, is there a plateau that you see, or is it going to continue to kind of increase, and at what rate? So that way we can plan, for what the future may look like. I'm going to also add in what Carl has stated, and I think while we haven't taken a consensus vote, it does seem as though we're gearing up toward some type of modification to next year, right? Be that hybrid or not open. So having working together with what that plan could look like and what would that adjust is going to be very helpful.
Steve, I think too that if you could actually gather some data around those questions and send it to us prior to the meeting next week. It might even be a better way to do it. So because I think timing is, unfortunately not going to be on the side of a lot of these requests right now, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to go through and they're not going to be valid. But there are some questions that, especially in terms of program delivery, that's going to be a real critical one for us to try to understand, especially with resource. So
yeah, definitely.
Anything you can get us in advance of the meeting, I think would be helpful for us in the decision-making process.
Well, and can I ask a follow-up question to that too? can you speak to any reprieve supports from the state in regards to SPED? Because I know
Yes.
before COVID, there was money that was hopefully going to be coming in, and I don't know what that looks like now.
Yeah, in January when the government indicated that they were going to go above and beyond and provide more funding in special education, that has now been deferred and placed on hold. And so we won't be expecting that additional funding in special education that he initially stated in January. In terms of any reprieves in programming, we do have reprieves and waivers in regards to our timelines around assessments. And then whatever we did have pending, we need to re-engage in all of the assessments when schools do reopen.
Are they changing the requirements as well, like number of hours and all of that?
No, because it's a federal law, it would take an act of Congress. And so due to that, they did keep mandates in IDEA as such. And so we are obligated to continue to provide services, although it's in a distance learning model right now. We've communicated with all of our parents and what that looks like in the distance learning plan. And so I can also share more specifics around that too.
Yeah. You know, Steve, I think it's fair to say and board that looking at CSBA's releases, California School Boards, 40% of the governor's budget is education. The governor is stating that the money being spent on COVID, you know, throughout the state is taking a pretty heavy toll on the state budget. And it's having a serious impact on where he can recapture some of the funding. And I think that's why you heard Steve say that they have moved away from their offer, or proposed offer to assist with the funding and resource, but it's not the only program that we're going to see in the school profiles that the government will probably step away from in terms of funding, and for good reason. So, you know, we're kind of stuck with the costs is what I'm saying at this particular point in time.
Hey, Steve, this is Sarah. Can I ask you, if you don't mind, to share with us what you shared with the parents in terms of your roadmap or your thoughts that you just mentioned for SPED instructional time for the fall?
Yeah, what I was referring to just recently was when we first indicated that we were closing, we needed to initiate things much quicker than some of our other peers in the county because we made the decision earlier. With that, the state and the federal government, they were also being reactive at that point in time, and we were receiving multiple guidance from both the state and the federal government. But in terms of what we're looking forward to now, we're able to be more proactive now because we're in the planning phase. And so rather than being reactive, we have to look what that might look like in terms of how we're going to meet the minutes for students with IEPs in both, I think really three formats, possibly a distance planning learning model, a hybrid approach, and or if we're going to have specific rooms and sites available so that we're able to provide minutes for students as they come to the sites in a safe manner. So we'll have to look at multiple plans, I think, and be ready.
Yeah, I think that's a good report, and anything you can get to us in advance of the meeting would be very helpful. And we feel your pain, let me tell you, we really do. I think we understand the class size situation pretty well, and the need to support the kids. We get all of that. So yeah, Steve, thanks for the update on this, and yeah, try to just see what you can get to.
Okay.
Prior to
okay.
And
great.
Thank you, Steve, for answering my question. I appreciate it.
Okay, and if there's anything else that you need from me during the interim, just let me know, and I'll get a question for you. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Sorry, I was muted again. So now we're going to move on and have Paul give you a brief presentation about our request for an increase in technology and why we believe that's important. And so there's some tables here that he may refer to. Paul, if you need me to scroll through anything, let me know. But I think he's going to do his best to give you just a big picture of this.
And I think
So Paul?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'll take over the screen. I have the same thing, but
Sure.
it'll allow me to flow a little bit. So before I get started, I really, here I am in the unenviable position of presenting the biggest single request on this list.
I noticed.
Time where the income is down and things like STRS and PERS and other things are up. So, and you're also even more so in this unenviable position. So I want to put it into some context before I get started on the details. We've been steadily moving towards online instruction. It's more of a kind of an adjunct, though, to our really strength as a school system and our teachers is in the classroom. But we've still been using more and more online resources, and we've steadily been moving towards tech as being a must, not a want, right? And I think the board has shown that recognition. And I've been in this position for over 20 years, and I've been watching and waiting for the kind of disruption that has happened to bookstores and publications like newspapers and magazines and the travel business and the whole retail industry and brick and mortar stores, right? Because online education has been available in good quality for a long time. And yet, for some reason, we haven't been hit by that sudden disruption. And I think part of that is because people value the quality of having that, in-person connection with the teacher, between teacher and child. And that is what this district has based itself on becoming excellent in. Now here we're in a position where our online presence is as important, and in this situation, it's more important than all the buildings we've been building. It's more important with all the millions and millions of dollars that we've rightfully put into providing facilities that honor our kids and our teachers, right? Give them a space like a theater where they can show what they can do and you elevate what they do. Our tech systems are going to make the difference right now in how we respond to this moment. That has got to become crystal clear. Everything that the kids and the parents and the teachers and the administrators are doing right now is being done on technology. So again, this is hard news to hear, but you know where we are right now. This COVID situation is driving some of this request, but you'll also see it's not all just COVID. There are things that since we did our last 3-year plan, and by the way, this is actually coming, this budget request really should have followed a presentation of the new 3-year plan because we have a new 3-year plan to present to you. But because of timing, you're hearing the request for the money without all the background of the kind of the rationale of where we're going. So some of it's COVID driven, but some of it we will need whether we are online, offline, or a hybrid. And I'll try to point some of those out. And the first column of the chart that I have is the theme that kind of ties this budget to the plan. So you will get a sense of what is in the plan and how it relates to both this, shelter-in-place situation and the just regular in-school needs that we have. So I'm going to orient you to this sheet, and in the first column you'll see kind of a category to align it to our tech plan. So the first couple are going to be related to distance learning. The next is a need for more and better devices. The let's see, am I sharing? Because hang on a second.
Yeah.
No, it's Yvonne's screen that's sharing right now.
I see.
There we go. I see Todd.
That's important, Carl.
It is.
You can actually always see Todd if you knew how to do it.
Oh,
But
all
I
right.
just
Well, you're up. You're up. You're up, Paul. We do see it now.
You there, Paul?
Related to security.
There we go.
Sorry, I'm going to back you up, Paul. Your audio is cutting in and out, and so now we see your screen, and your audio does sound good.
Okay, let's see what happens here.
So you can, start again.
Back to, all right. Security is going to be another big chunk for today's presentation. Infrastructure and some other miscellaneous things, including some training and communications. These things are sorted by category, and then the most expensive item is at the top of each category. So you'll see in distance learning, the first item is the cellular hotspot service, which is just really one model to get to the concept that we need to provide some kind of connectivity for kids who don't have it. Because if they don't have it, it doesn't matter what we do. And there may be other ways to skin this cat. For example, Todd has talked to us about the idea of the potential of giving families some kind of, funding support for them to get their own services. But as you know, right now, we're testing this hotspot. And we think we're leaning in this direction just because it allows us to help parents who are not technical and also who don't have the cash flow right now, many of them, to go and start up a service or pay for this and then being reimbursed by the district. So this is an idea that, and I roughed it out with the idea of about 100 students paying for cellular service for the school year, and including some devices for those students. This is really strictly an estimate. It is based on some survey results we've received from families, so there is some basis of reality to that. The other pieces I should orient you to across the top, the third column, the school year 2020, 2021, that is the full cost of that line item. The next category is probably the most important, those next two columns, the one that says funding difference ongoing and funding difference one time. That represents the money we need that's not already existing somewhere else in the tech budget. All right. So you'll see also under the distance learning, the Zoom. We've been using Zoom successfully. We think we should continue using it. We have thanks to Rob Perry, our network administrator, he arranged to get a free educational account for us, but that expires at the end of this school year. And this is what we anticipate the cost would be for the next school year. The next category is devices. We've spent a lot of time looking at what do our teachers need, what do our classrooms need, and one of the big needs that's become magnified. This is, by the way, true whether we're offline or online, whether we're in school or working from outside of school. The devices that we've been providing the teachers, we have been refurbished devices, and they've been working okay in a classroom environment, but they're not great at all in the online only environment, right? Where the cameras are non-existent or substandard in those devices. So we really need to provide better devices for our staff, especially since this is their total connection to their students. If we don't go to school at all next year, then I suppose it's not that important to build up the computers that are only at school. Like there's mini labs in the back of the elementary classrooms, but for the most part, we really need this kind of money. It also has an element of the untethering you've heard us talk about, that the teachers, when they're back in the classrooms, really need a device that they can really wander around this classroom with and not be just stuck to their projection station that's tied to a projector. You'll also see an increased request of $29,000 because Chromebooks for students are costing more, and we need to keep up with that. We also have actually no line item for technology department hardware that our techs need to do their job. So that makes up the device section. Moving down to the security section, there's a lot here, and some of it is pretty technical. So I'll stay at especially at the top two lines. This first line that says Fortinet firewall, our firewall in our long range plan, and by the way, Rob has worked up a 10-year plan so we can see where things that need to be replaced get cycled in and at what years they're going to affect our budget. This would not have had to have been done until next year, but because all of the traffic that's coming into our system from outside, our firewall is being hammered, and at the rate that we're going, it will not handle the load that it's getting if we start next year in an online environment. So this is now a must do this coming year if we expect at all that we'll be working online. And it says it's in the one-time only category of $168,000. That's not completely true. It will need to be, after 3 years, a portion of that will have to be paid in a new 3-year maintenance cycle. But for today's purposes and for next year's budget purposes, we can consider it one-time money that will come back again with the need for three years later. Another biggie in the security category is the second line, Microsoft 365 Azure AD, that stands for Active Directory and Intune. This is to allow us to do the device management that we have to do. Now that our computers are not at the school building, the controls, the things we do to set them up and to manage them, we don't have those controls because none of them are in our buildings. That's a $75,000 cost. This next item is highlighted in yellow because we believe it was, it was approved as part of the original Project 2020 infrastructure project a few years ago. But we just want to make sure it's noted in there that that is a recurring amount that comes up this year. We need to do faculty training. We have already had phishing attacks, some close calls while we've been away from school in the past few weeks. And we had a pretty serious incident a year ago, January, that we've done some training, but not near enough. We can tell that our staff is being targeted with phishing and other things, and they need to be trained. And this system would allow us to train them and also track which of our employees are putting the district most at risk without even knowing that they're doing it. You'll see other things on there, email encryption, a log analyzer so we can investigate and track incidents that may have happened in the past to tell if we've been affected. Sometimes you don't learn for weeks or more that something may have happened, and our current storage only allows us to look back a few days. So we have very little ability to investigate and figure out what happened if there is a security incident. We also need some money for cloud-based backup as extra redundancy if anything were to happen to all our on-premises equipment. Next category is infrastructure, the Extreme Campus Agreement. That's the Extreme equipment is what we use for our switches across the district. This allows us to have regular maintenance across every device that we have, and it also allows us to have more support from Extreme to manage those switches. Data center servers, Rob has a really good idea to buy a new node, which is kind of basically a way of servicing a virtual server. Each year we buy a new one, and that will allow our system to remain evergreen, so that every year we can cycle in a new node and cycle out an old node and keep it running and keeping it fresh. We need some data center servers at the cost of $40,000 one time. That is more of an estimate. We do need to check that estimate. Some battery backups. We have applied for money for E-rate. So the cost is roughly $25,000. That's the main battery that, by the way, the last time we had a power outage, there were 2 of them in a row. And the second time the power outage hit, our servers did not come back up. And Rob had to spend a weekend on the phone with the folks from Dell to get the server back up. So this fresh set of batteries will prevent that from happening in the future. There's G Suite. That's allow us to manage our Google, you guys know you're using Google Mail. We use Google tools for just about everything nowadays. That gives us a lot more ability to manage it, especially again, that we're working away from school. I don't think I need to go into a lot of this other little detail. Some of these items are smaller. I will say you're going to be looking and pushing us for things that are, you know, more wishes than wants or than needs. These cabinets, our cabinets are substandard in some places, but really, truly, especially if we're not back in school, if we don't replace a cabinet next year, that's not a big deal, right? A couple other places, this Adobe Creative Cloud, that would be to buy licenses so people can use Adobe Acrobat for signatures and things like that. But there may be ways that could come out of each department's budget. If they need a copy of it, they could pay for it. This model was for the district tech department to pay for a blanket license for about a dozen users. You'll see one negative number, which is a good sign. We found that our WAN, which is the wide area network provided by MCOE, that we had budgeted that in two separate line items, and one of them that we can remove. We don't need to pay from that source anymore, and so that will bring some money back into our coffers to lower the overall hit to the budget. We desperately need technology department training. Our folks are having to learn things on their own and pass it along to teachers, and we have no good model to get that training to them. So this would provide some online resources, and potentially, if they ever let us back out into the real world, a seminar or two. Slack, we use that as a communication tool. It provides all kinds of ready communication between different groups, but we can't manage it if we don't subscribe to it. We're using a free tool right now. We're asking for our one-time discretionary monies to be lowered by 30,000, because if we pay for some of the things above, we won't need to pay for it out of the discretionary anymore. And then the last line is kind of a miscellaneous group of systems that we use, including Aries, Incident IQ, which is our help system, our backup system called SysCloud, and others that we are anticipating they're going to charge us more, as they do every year. And I think that column that says 12,000 is wrong. That should be $52,000. So that would raise the total in that column to $1,253,500. But it doesn't change the column that asks for the request, which is the $536,196. That's the ongoing amount. And then the $237,500, which is the one-time money. So I will stop sharing my screen. I have thrown a lot at you. You probably have questions.
I do. I don't have a question. I have a comment. I'm going to start with a comment. You know, Paul, unfortunately, you live in one of the biggest parts of our budget that we have, and technology. And one of my concerns is what are our finances going to look like? We're, unlike ADA districts, we are strictly funded by property taxes pretty much. And even though we have an assessor who has said there's no relief, you got to pay them when they're due. Will people pay them because of the unemployment issue and the shutdown of businesses and all of those things? I think the potential for income to the district is at risk, to say the least, simply because of the unknown. How do people pay their property taxes if they can't go to work? So we're looking at a big piece of the budget, and my take on it is absolutely we have to honor the contractual commitments we have with all of the people that you work with and all of the contracts that you have to maintain. I think you're absolutely right about distance learning. I think distance learning is going to have to be a priority for you because you know, we have to be there. I think we know that. I think the question for you to help us is really, what is it in your budget that we could delay in terms of either implementation or costs? Your recommendations, and I mean, it could range for anywhere from none to some.
I'm going to let Rob take that question because he has a very good answer for you.
Rob, you out there?
Yep, I'm here. The short answer, not a whole lot. As Paul mentioned, I've been working for the last several months on developing basically a 10-year budget projection for the department. There were quite a few things that we were looking at for this next fiscal year that I've eliminated before we get to this point. And a lot of those were security related items. There were some, a lot of we really should be doing this. But as I went back and looked at it with this knowledge in mind that we were going to be in this position, with the changes and the uncertainty surrounding what is the school year going to look like next year, I went back and reevaluated, focusing on this next fiscal year with an eye also towards the following 2 years on what would need to be recurring, and I pulled out a lot of things.
Okay,
and some of them we're going to be hurting for.
Here's what would be helpful here, Rob,
Mm-hmm.
is to demonstrate that to the board. We would need to look at we see what you have. We would also need to have an assessment of what you have pulled out, so that we know. For example, other programs will say, well, we were going to do this, but we've taken them out, and here's what they were. So
Right.
I think a comprehensive report in terms of supporting your position would be to do just that, and to just provide with us, this is what we have removed from, in consideration of the potential budget that we could be looking at and things like that. So I guess my thing would be to have a more comprehensive report, which, by the way, what you've provided is excellent, Paul and company. But I think it's also fair to say we've done that, and this is the stuff that we have already moved away.
Right. And some of that will be reflected, as Paul said, we're kind of doing this out of order, right? So a lot of this is reflected in the tech plan that we're going to be presenting at the next meeting. So you'll see references to things in that tech plan that we've now looked at and said, well, let's wait on that, or let's push that off a little bit, or let's kind of diminish the total goal that we were going at. Just as an example, one piece of it is the Microsoft 365 subscription. We have a lot of staff and a lot of students who are actively using Office 365 for some of their projects. And so there's a subscription level to that we were considering. The cost for that total subscription is significantly higher than the amount that we're asking just for this management piece. So we've thinned that part back.
Okay, here's the point that I'm making is that's an excellent example, by the way. But take all of those examples and put them together in a format, so we don't have to pick out what they are in a document that is pretty comprehensive. I think at a time like this, what you want to do is exactly what you've done with the needs. You have to come up with something that's user friendly to lay people, that specifically says this is out, this is delayed, this is out, this is out. So it's much easier for us to justify where you're coming from. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
And a lot of that, like I said, is that from that 10-year plan that we've been working through.
Yeah.
One other thing I do want to make a point of is we're still getting quotes and still working with our vendors, trying to adjust some of these numbers. So there's some of these numbers that have been presented today that using the G Suite numbers, for example, the quote that we got back is almost 50% of what we've put into this document, right? So some of these numbers we're working with them, trying to get those numbers down. Some of them are coming back a little bit higher. So this is, as Yvonne said, this is a draft. We're still working through that. As we get those numbers, I'm putting those into my spreadsheet that reflects the 10-year plan and making those adjustments, and we'll definitely be building from that and be able to provide that information for you.
You're in the same boat as Yvonne in terms of numbers being accurate. What we think or project is often higher than we suspected. And we've learned that through the bond construction process, where we thought we were in one place, and next thing we knew, it went off the map on us in terms of costs. So we understand that, and you're in that world where there are not absolutes in terms of what you're doing. I'm just thinking that we just need to know that you've done that side of the homework on the other end of it to justify where you've landed.
Yep. And yeah, we've done that. And definitely we can put something like that together for you. You know, something that the tech department, other than the Project 2020 is a special project, the tech department has not had a significant budget increase for quite a while. And because of that, as costs have increased, we have worked every year to kind of evaluate what can we not do this year? What do we maybe not need, you know, the 24/7 support from a vendor, but maybe, you know, an 8x5 support or no support. And we've done a lot of that, and we've gone to the refurbished laptops for the teachers and things like that. And unfortunately, it just kind of coincided that this year we've hit that point where we've kind of been pared down to the bone. And with the tariffs and things like that, our costs have increased significantly, especially with hardware and some of that stuff. So that's also feeding into this as well.
I think you need to take credit for it because I can see that you've been doing it. And Paul's mentioned in his initial report here today, a couple of places, several places where you have done some, you know, salvaging of things and trying to use reconditioned stuff. And you've done a pretty good job. I just think you need to quantify it so that the board can see the full progress, the full, you know, program of what you've done in terms of being able to cut costs on program here and using equipment here, or, you know, whatever it is. It will help us to justify the biggest number we have in our budget for any single particular program.
And really, I wanted to break it down into I'm here for one line, well, only, which is the teacher hardware line.
Yeah.
It's something that I have worked with the teachers on, you know, this entire year, because as Rob said, and as you know, Carl, we have done a lot to do hand-me-downs and get by one more year with teacher hardware. And we were already realizing we were at that line. And then of course this hit, and the number of issues we've had just with teacher hardware in this in the school closure has been pretty remarkable. And so it's just a sign that, you know, there are some things that are truly necessary.
Sure.
But I agree. Yeah. We can look at that again and make a clearer report on that.
Well, I appreciate that, Colin. I really do. And that's all I'm really asking for is just to package the dilemma that you have faced in terms of equipment and just let us know what you have done. So it paints that picture in an easier way for us to see it. That's all.
So, Paul, Robin, Colin, thanks for putting all that together. And I will add or agree with Carl that having the, let's say the pieces that you've carved out allow us to complement you, right? So this is something to say, like, you've done an amazing job, put this together, and here's the differences that you've thought through the process that, you know, so rather than having us say that it hasn't been done, you clearly can represent that it has been done and have that number quantified. I think one thing that may help, Paul, I'm going to ask you this question to see if it's worthwhile to then kind of go around the room on, let's say, getting a consensus from the board, because you're looking to present this, the area of what next year looks like from a technology standpoint around distance learning versus, you know, in room, because that, as you succinctly and properly stated in the beginning, that we're at a time where technology is going to move to the forefront, especially if we end up being a distance learning as let's say the leading way for education, at least next year. So would it be of benefit to hear from the board on what they're thinking, in the sense of, does that look likely or unlikely? Because then that at least can cast the future plan you're putting together around, hey, this is something more towards distance learning, or this is something more towards on-site.
If I can jump in just for a second, and maybe this will help put it a little bit into perspective, is, you know, we're facing three potential situations, right? Completely on-prem, completely off-prem, or this hybrid model. Mm-hmm. Because of the needs that we've had, and the urgency of getting everybody to an off-prem scenario for this shelter-in-place through this COVID situation, we effectively stripped out a lot of the classrooms. We had teachers go in, we had techs go in, they pulled equipment to hand that out for people to take home. So as we're looking at this for next year, the hardest scenario for us, budget-wise and tech-wise, support-wise, is the hybrid scenario, because now we have to replenish not just the devices that teachers have at home. We have to get those classrooms back up and reconfigured and available for on-prem usage as well. So when we were putting a lot of these numbers together, that's what we use as our worst case scenario for planning, is we have to do both. And that does drive some of these numbers up quite a bit, just in supporting both scenarios, to be able to have that equipment and for instruction to continue.
That's remarkably helpful, Rob.
So, and I hate to say this, but as these plans become more, what I keep calling plan A, plan B, and C, you know, we're back at school, we're, you know, totally online, or we're totally, hybrid. The hybrid model, if we do that, there may be other implications that come up. Like a lot of the computers that are now being out there as loaners, or like our kindergarten through second grade, they don't have one-to-one. But anyone who's asked for a computer, we've been able to help them by pulling computers from the elementary classrooms, because unless an elementary student asked us for a computer, we didn't give them one, right? Because they're not like the 6th through 12th graders. They just all took their computers home. If we're in a hybrid model, we're going to need the computers that we've used as loaners back in the classroom and out in the field. And Ryan Peterson was one of the, you know, this just came up in a conversation the other day, but if that model, and that is a likely model, there's stuff that isn't even on the list yet, that may be even harder for us to work from. I just want us to be careful to not conflate the problem that we're having with the budget and the fact that we're asking for money for technology, because the easy thing to say would be, well, this isn't very convenient, so we're going to say no to it, or no to big chunks of it. When at this moment in time, the technology of many of the things that we do is the thing that's holding us together. And Carl, it's going to be hard for someone like Rob, I think, to really express the security needs of this district. The risks that we take by not having some of those pieces in place.
Sure, I get that. I get that.
And especially when people are home, they're not in the environment that we control. They're hammering our firewall. And I'm not just talking about our students with legitimate use of our internal resources, but all these people across the world who seem to have plenty of free time, but do nothing but, you know, attack firewalls across the world and try to Zoom bomb in every creative way they can.
Yeah. Tess, you got your hand up there.
Yeah, I mean, my first gut reaction is it looks like we need to do some fundraising. So that was the first thing that came to mind. But with all of these funds out there, are there opportunities for grants to try to retrieve some of these outrageous costs that are going to be hitting our district? Are there possibilities out there?
In the tech side, I'm on, and so is Todd, on a MCOA committee, looking at things like devices and connectivity. And there's things that are in the offing, but nothing that I know that's solid at this point. So there may be a couple of things. I'm hoping, you know, and it may come in the form of the carriers like AT&T and Verizon having even a more reduced rate for schools, or federal or state government having increased, subsidies to school children. But right now, none of those that I'm aware of are reality. They're possibilities.
Yeah. The problem for grants with Carmel Unified is our profile.
Yeah. One of the things that is coming up.
Excuse me, Rob, you there?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was gonna say, it's our school profile. We're a basic aid district that has the highest student expenditure in the state of California for any school, public or basic aid, any public school. Let's just put it that way. So we're not going to attract a lot of attention there, unless, of course, we're looking at people in the tech world that are trying to try something new and they're looking for a place to do it, that kind of thing. But what I want to make clear though, Paul, is moving away from that a little bit, is the board has to be able to say that they have vetted the expenditure that we have in technology. We have to be able to go there to justify expenses. It's not that we don't believe you. It's just that we have to have the data and the information to know where you are and how, you know, what your rationale for being there is and how you see yourself moving forward, and that you have done. And what I was saying and what Todd actually supported is you have done a good job of trying to manage the program in a financially responsible way. But it's important to show that because we're the ones in the community that have to be able to support that. We also understand that you are in a dilemma. Your program is in a dilemma where we don't know what anticipated costs are going to be to provide the kind of services that this district will expect you to do. There's a very high expectation in Carmel Unified to deliver the highest quality programs on the planet. So, and they should be. So I think you have to understand, we get that. And as you move forward, we're not going to hamstring you, in my opinion, to do that. We just need to be able to say that we have looked at this budget situation with technology and say we understand it, and we're ready to move forward. That to me is pretty much where it's at.
Yeah. And one thing I did want to mention is one program that we are keeping a really close eye on is the E-rate program. The FCC and USAC have been looking at kind of revamping that program somewhat, opening up to different categories that were previously not allowed. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that we're looking at right now is not does not qualify for E-rate, right? Some of our communication circuits do qualify. Some of the hardware that we've purchased in the past does qualify. A lot of the stuff that we're looking at this year does not at this time. And unfortunately, that process, they keep shelving any discussion on making those changes. So we know it's going to be at least 2 years at this point before some of that stuff is even considered again. And so that's kind of the position we're in as well of, we'd kind of held off. We were hoping that, like the firewall, for instance, was going to become a much more qualified object under E-rate. That did not happen this go around in these discussions. Yeah. And they're not going to discuss that again for a while.
So, I hope you don't, the inquiry here is the same one we're making for instruction as well. At the site, do you really have to have that teacher? Can you possibly look at doing that in a different model? That kind of thing. So don't feel alone. The board will do this whenever you have unanticipated funds that didn't come in, and the economic perspective that we're looking at in the future. So we're not, what we're doing with you, we'll do it with Dan Paul in maintenance and say, what is it that we could wait on, and what is it that we have to get done now? So that's what you do when the budget is in question. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. I have a question for Rob. Mm-hmm. Rob, do you have different budget scenarios and breakdowns for the 3 different back to school models that everybody keeps referencing? I know that we've heard ad nauseum about option A, where we all go back and it's business as usual, and then option B, the hybrid, and then option C is just from distance learning at home. We've all talked a lot about those 3 options, but it sounds to me from what you've been stating is that the different schooling scenarios require different technology aspects and different things that go into that. So could you please provide a breakdown of option A, B, and C?
Okay, yeah, I don't have anything at the ready. A lot of it has just been my scratch paper and notes and different things that I've put together, but I don't know if I could pull that together before the next board meeting, but I can at least get some rough numbers, I think, pulled together.
Yeah, part of the problem, Sarah, is we haven't defined B, or especially B. It's really the hybrid that's the one that we don't know exactly what that looks like. I think we know what it looks like if everybody returns to school. And I think we have a pretty good idea from our recent experience of what it's like if everybody's still at home. So it's the hybrid that becomes the trickier one. And I think, at least given the line items that we've shown you, I think there are ways we could say, like, again, if we don't return to school, teachers aren't going to need an untethered tablet. You know, that is a classroom, unless Colin.
Yeah, actually they will, because they're doing screencasts on iPads and anyway, so.
But, yeah. But that's a good example. That's might not be the perfect example, but that's the type of thing where it would be interesting. I mean, based on what we're looking at for the future, where our numbers are going or where they could go, right? Yeah. So I think that would at least help me. I don't know about the rest of you all.
Yeah, I think we could take a stab at that to show some level of difference where a hybrid model might increase the need for something or reduce the need for something else.
And I'm going to jump in just quickly, briefly. I'm glad Sarah weighed in there, because I think we have a lot of anxiety sort of out there with our families and certainly with our staff and teachers. And we need to be mindful about that. You know, we sort of throw these scenarios out as though they're well developed and they're in stone, and they're not. So I would just say that we are all very trying to take those steps and listen to the guidance that we're being given by the state and the local people, and, you know, develop the most definite plans, but they are not well defined at this moment in time. So Sarah, thank you for probing that a little bit too, for people that have that sense out there of what's going on, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate, you know, as we've worked these numbers, you know, as I said, you know, we took kind of looking at the hybrid, you know, having to support both on and off-prem, and use that as our worst case scenario. And basically with that, we ran with the high numbers and the high estimates. So most of the quotes, as we're getting them back, are lower than what is reflected on this sheet. And we'll be able to update those as we continue working with our vendors and talk them down a bit, or work some different deals and get some different pricing available.
And then, Carl, can I ask you a question? It's clarification. So you've asked us to kind of report back what we've pulled out, what things that we considered, or things that are in the 3-year plan that we said not now. Those we haven't priced all of those out. So some of them may just show up as a line item, you know, this type of security level or some other item. And would that be suitable? Because once we decided that particular concept is not a high priority front burner one, we didn't explore the costs necessarily.
You're muted,
I might
Carl.
still be muted, yeah.
Here I go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You've got a couple categories. One is stuff that you haven't had the time to pursue that you've pulled. The second category would be things that are not necessarily going to come to the forefront, that are on that plan, that 2020 plan. And things like, I don't know, how far along are we with campus security? And do we need to actually make investments further along those lines? It's extremely important stuff, but what is it that has to come to the forefront versus what it is that maybe we don't need to spend as much time on? Unfortunately, you guys are at the forefront of the biggest problem we have at this point in time. It's not this budget. You know, the budget, we will work out the conditions and the situations with the budget. It's the community input to the process, which is huge. We haven't started it in terms of ideas and bringing them into this equation, and then delivery. And unfortunately, you guys, or fortunately, we are fortunate because we have you, but that piece of it is going to be our biggest challenge. And getting instruction out to the district. And the problem is all of the moving parts. I mean, we don't know. Partial closure, partial start, full start. Who knows? How much time are you going to put in that? How much time are you going to put in that? So we're asking a lot. I want you guys to know that. I'm very impressed by what you have been able to do. And all of the things that you are juggling in a somewhat small department. that has a gigantic responsibility. So yeah, Paul, I think it's just fair for the board to know and to be able to say, hey, they've really looked at this. And, you know, if we were talking about a tiny budget somewhere, this conversation would have been over a long time ago, but it isn't. It's a big piece.
Yep.
So I hope that's helpful.
It is. Thank you.
I just
go ahead, Annette.
Does anyone else want to say anything? Because I think
I do, but I'm gonna let you go first, Annette.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to say I appreciate, first of all, the whole presentation. That was really helpful for this, and I really appreciate Sarah bringing up the people side of it. You know, the idea that this is how it's going to affect our students, it's going to affect our staff, depending on the different scenarios, because that's what was going through my particular head as well. And I was thinking, as you are planning to put together your tech plan to us, and I realized we kind of did the cart before the horse this time, maybe it would be helpful to use the tech plan as a platform to show some of the kind of differences between the costs for the three different models. And also, you know, at least the way my brain works, it may not work for anyone else this way, but I think of this as kind of like when we do a facilities issue or facilities bid, we have add-ons that get added on if certain things happen. So if we decide to have a particular program, and I can't really give you the example in tech because I don't understand it enough, but it's like layers, but of things. And so in a facilities plan, it might be that you have three different particular facilities, things that you're considering. One with this many classroom seats, one that's bigger than that, and then a third one that has, you know, some kind of frill that you could add on. And so then there's kind of a plus and a minus that you can do. So you have the base that you absolutely know you need, and then what are the add-ons? And I know that's asking a lot. That might be too much to ask in the tech world, but it would be that kind of a format might be really helpful for us. You know, if we have to go back to this model, or we're going back to the all physical in place model, what things will have to change, because even if we go back to what we were doing before, things have been dismantled, like you were saying. How do we go back to it? That kind of thing. So it's like an add-on process, if that is possible. I don't know if it is. And also linking it to the actual tech plan that you were doing to us, that might make more sense because it's more comprehensive.
Yeah, let me just say though about the tech plan, that was primarily written before this, and we have a quick add-on section for COVID-19 that is just by necessity not as thick and thorough as all the other thinking we were able to do while we had time and the luxury of you know, not doing all these other things we're doing to keep school going right now. But I think I do get the concept, and I think we can come close to the target of what you are asking for, what Sarah and Carl have asked for.
Yeah. Todd?
So one of the things I was striving for there, Paul, was to try and have, see if we can have the board describe, you know, what are the possible scenarios. It sounds like if you're already ready with the A, B, and C, or the ability to do these A, B, and C. I think one of the things that the community has been asking for and will continue to ask for, especially through the summer, is what does next year look like, right? And so obviously the tech department doesn't decide that, right? But the tech department clearly, I mean, at this point, you know, there's this A, B, and C. Overall with the district, we're going to need to be pretty clear that we have a plan with A, B, and C. And so that way, part of this is because, the district may not be making the decision, right? Depending, obviously, we can't be more, we can't loosen restrictions from the county or from the state, but we can certainly tighten them. So that's the piece that we're all going to need to be monitoring. But such a huge part of that plan, I guess what you're calling Plan C, if we say Plan C is the remote learning, is to have it where that's at the same standard that people have gotten used to with Carmel Unified from our historic Plan A, right? So let me try and put that into context for you. Is that if everybody goes back and everything's, let's say, quote unquote normal in Plan A, then the ease of the feeling throughout the community would be, oh, whew, we're back to the level of education that we would have been comfortable with, right? So Plan A, from that standpoint, let's say the certainty is at an all-time high from the community of like, hey, we're going to get educated. The Plan B, this hybrid, it just throws up a bunch of questions, right? What does that look like? How's it going, right? Okay, and Plan C is also a whole bunch of questions. So what we're going to need as leadership and leaders in this space will be to articulate clearly what those plans are going to be. Now, a big chunk of that, of course, falls to technology when we're talking about Plan B or Plan C. And so the area that I am stressing to you is to make sure that you're communicating with the district and AC and board on laying out what those plans are, so that the overall community understands, we feel comfortable if it's A, B, or C. If the state says it's must be C, then we're stuck with C, right? If they say it must be, hey, A is an option, then at least our district could choose, hey, is B better or is C better, right? So hopefully that at least frames it appropriately as to the bigger picture of what we're trying to deal with. And then obviously I'm trying to also stress to Tricia Dellis, so that planning aspect of things is going to help us on the bigger picture with regard to community certainty that we know what we're doing.
No, I think Annette's idea is actually the one we use for facilities is a pretty good one, because that's how we build a facilities plan, is starting with the base program, and that would be the closest to what we do normally, regularly in technology, and hoping the school's open. The add-on would be, the next add-on would be a partial opening where we do have some attendance and some distance learning. And the next add-on to it would be a full distance learning model, and associated costs and the ramp up of those three stages. So that might add a little coherence in terms of how we at least are able to see it. But I'll tell you what, I think, Paul, if you don't have, I mean, you kind of get where we're coming from.
Yeah.
And Rob and the company, and, we appreciate everything you're doing. I think at this point, we'll hear from you again, more than likely on the 20th. So I think it's probably time to move forward and let Yvonne finish out her report, unless anybody on the board has further questions.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Was that Tricia Dellis?
No, that was Yvonne. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, sorry. So I did just want to let everybody know, in the spirit of talking about option A, option B, option C, there will be, this is not tech related specifically, but I think our distance learning areas and room for improvement are up for discussion. And I think there's a lot of parents who care deeply about their experiences that their students will have next year, whether it is A, B, or C. So I just wanted to let this group know that Carl and Tricia Dellis and I are working on a town hall. It'll be a parent symposium, if you will. We don't have the logistics, the agenda, the details quite yet, but the three of us have locked down the date of May 29th, the last Friday of May. Mm-hmm. And the hope and the outcome of this town hall is really that the parents in this community that have been at home distance learning with their students for the past 8 weeks can share their experiences. There's a lot of stuff out there that worked. There's areas for room for improvement. And I think a lot of our great parents out there have done research on what other districts and other schools are doing in the fall. So I know Carl and I are excited to hear about some of the research that's been done. So I just wanted you all to kind of be looking out for more information from us on that, because I personally think it'll be a great opportunity for all of us to hear from our parent community.
Let me tack onto that real quick before we leave. I've been getting, and Sarah in particular has been getting quite a bit of feedback from the community about wanting to be involved in the process. And some of those parents have sent us some links, and we've looked at Pacific Grove Unified in terms of the way they're structuring that and setting that up. We're a little behind the curve on that, I'll be honest with you. But I think that we have to go there. And I think that there's a wealth of information out there that they could potentially offer in the way of people in the community that might have some experience with this. But the big thing is they have to be a part of the equation. And tip my hat to Sarah, because she's kind of the point person on this. But we are going to have to bring them in, and we welcome them in. And the fact that parents have been getting back to us, to the board, that's what parents generally do, about their concerns and their interest in setting these kinds of things up is a big plus for us. It really is. It's the transparency is there. We really need their support. They're the ones that will be most directly affected by whatever we do, especially if we were to go to a Model 3 where it's all distance learning. The economy is still flat, and that could be a real problem for parents. So thanks, Sarah, for bringing that up. And yeah, it's a big important thing. Yvonne?
Okay, really great discussion that I think was super important. I'll just take us back to this report that's displaying on the screen now, and just and then move on very quickly. But so I want to mention again that we have increasing revenues of 1.8. Lines 1 through 8, which are contractual obligations right now, they equal $2.8 million. And so, as I mentioned before, it's about a $900,000 shortfall just to cover our contractual obligations. The additions come out to $1,102,000. And so that's a total of what you're seeing on this spreadsheet of $3.9 million. So if we did everything that's on this spreadsheet, we would be looking at having to dip into our reserves to the tune of $2.1 million.
Got it.
Okay, so let me scroll past all of this technology information. I do have Dan Paul on this as well if we need to ask him some questions, but I'll go through this. We have $7.5 million that were moved from the general fund reserves. So one-time dollars, once they hit reserves, they become one-time dollars. And over the years, they've been moved to Fund 40, which Fund 40 is our capital improvements fund to do facility improvements. And so right now we have some projects that are in progress, and I had heard the camera project mentioned. It's not complete yet. We have a couple of projects that are in progress. And at some point we can have a study session on facilities again when it becomes important. Right now we have many other things that are rising above that right now. But I wanted to make you aware of that. We do not plan to spend all of that money at this point, and it's going to be important because the way the county auditor or the county treasurer's office looks at our funds, it's that all funds are added together. And so we will need that cash flow that's sitting there. But some of the projects that Dan and I have talked about that may rise to the top are listed here. Do you have any questions about this list here?
Yvonne and Dan,
Yes.
I think, Dan, it would be very helpful if you were to prioritize these projects that we're looking at. Obviously, I would think a 2-hour septic system is pretty critical. So I think, coming back on this is not a huge piece of our budget. It's there. And I know we're not going to spend it all down, but I would like to get maintenance operations and Dan Paul to say, absolutely got to do this. This would be a good thing to do. We could probably wait on this. Even in this category, there should be a prioritization within it.
Right. And
Dan,
Carl, Dan, just a second. Carl and I have talked about this, but Dan, please chime in here.
Sure, I can provide something more in depth at the next meeting, but some of these are pretty critical. If you look at the septic system, that's pretty critical. Yes. The new well at the middle school would replace the failed well and has the potential to save us a couple $100,000 a year in water costs to irrigate the field. So I think that one's pretty critical. The improvements to the kitchen and cafeteria at the high school and middle school, if you remember, we identified that as a high priority in the master plan. And as we move forward, food service is one of the areas that's not getting a lot of attention, but if we go to a hybrid model, you have to try and imagine them feeding the kids that are on campus and shipping meals out to the kids that are at home. It's going to be challenging for them to work in the space they have right now with the equipment. It's an 18-year-old kitchen in there that hasn't had a lot of work, so it definitely needs some attention.
Yeah, I think Dan, Dan, I think, you just need to reorder this list for us. Look, I know we'd like to have lights on the field at the high school, but there probably is very highly likely we won't even have a sports season in the fall. You know what I mean? So when you look at it, you can kind of get the drift as to how this might look. The other thing I want to say is I'm very sympathetic to the cafeteria and kitchen program because, quite frankly, it's very outdated in terms of just about every perspective that we have. And we've been talking about that. That's huge. And it's good for you to highlight that the impact that outdated facility is going to have on the potential possibility of having to deliver services that are tough enough to deliver in a regular program, now going distance with it. So don't think for 1 minute we haven't noticed that. Okay. So Dan, just flip the list around.
Okay, will do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So we're heading towards the end of this. Some final thoughts. I won't read this out to you, but I would like to just point out that we have some possible options. Those are just two possible options that are presented. Just to kind of summarize where we are with this, I'd like to say that revenues are not coming in as expected. They're very volatile and even more difficult to predict than we've had in the past. They could be higher, they could be lower. Property taxes are not resulting in the same level of funding from the pre-recession model. So the only thing that I can guarantee right now in terms of this budget that you're seeing is that the numbers will change, especially as decisions are more finalized, but they also will change just based on what's happening at the state level and as property tax revenues come in. As we plan for next year's budget, we also need to consider the multi-year projection going out, and the assessor's office has indicated a 0% increase. So potentially in the 2 years out from the budget model that we're preparing, it could get worse. So we need to keep that in mind. We have no control over revenue, but we have control over expenses. And so we stay fiscally solvent by controlling our expenses. Reserves provide the time to move forward in the short term and allows us the time to strategically plan together with our board, with our employee groups, and with our parents. We need to have some critical conversations. This all hit us so quickly that that hasn't necessarily occurred, and we could be doing a better job with that as well. So we need to educate our stakeholders on our upcoming challenges and engage with them as we plan going forward during these challenging times. At the May 20th board meeting, we will provide a verbal update regarding the governor's budget as the impact begins to unravel more fully, and to also answer any questions that you have asked today. If you have any other questions as a result of this meeting, please forward those questions to us so we can prepare for that. We are not asking for, I'm sorry?
I just had a quick question, Yvonne. I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought you were. So my question is, overall big picture, what have we seen any savings as a result of this time period due to lack of, keeping the lights on, running the buses and all of that. Is that indicated anywhere?
Right, Tess, I've looked a little bit at that. As I mentioned earlier, Tumai is working on estimated actuals. She had to spend her time just putting this budget together, which is quite time consuming. And so now she's at the task of preparing estimated actuals. But I did look at a couple of line items, busing being one of them, fuel for those buses. We would be generating quite a large saving on that. But we also know that we have some expenses that are not bringing in revenues. So for example, you know, the childcare where we're continuing to pay the teachers, but we don't have the revenue that we thought we would have coming in on that. So about a $275,000 loss on that program. And there will be a few others like that, but I think there will also be some savings that will offset those. And I will be able to bring that to you before you are adopting the budget.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Tess. And I think it's important to look at the offsets in terms of not having to heat classrooms or even heat the pool or all of those sort of costs, especially transportation. And of course, they will probably be offset by other expenses, but it's still good to know the offsets and what they look like. So, you know, at this point, let's let the board summarize individually where they are at this point in time before we close. And yeah, go ahead, Tess, Todd, it doesn't matter who, let's just.
Well, is Yvonne, are you done? So I feel like I cut you off when I asked my question.
No, I think it looks to me like she had reached she asked for questions to be sent in the future to her. So.
Okay, so then I'll start. I just want to say, I can't imagine the difficulty for all of you on many levels with this ever evolving changes that are coming from the state as well as the county health department. And I just, from my heart, want to say thank you for all your efforts, and know we will get through this very difficult time. And Yvonne, you absolutely have my grace. So that's all I want to say.
Well, thank you.
Sarah.
I would also like to thank Yvonne and all of the presenters today for such a thorough and productive and very direct readout of what has been presented here. It's been very helpful. I also want to thank you all for responding to all of our questions and comments and concerns. I know everybody who presented is leaving this meeting with a little bit of homework, so I want to thank you all for that. And then Yvonne, I really, like Tess said, just can't thank you enough for all the effort put in here. And I specifically would like to thank you very much for continuing to acknowledge that our parent community should be and will be a part of our ongoing budget discussion. So thank you very much for acknowledging that piece. And I appreciate all the work that you've all done. Thank you.
Todd.
Yeah, Yvonne, you knocked it out of the park. This is exactly what we needed at this time. And I could not be more impressed. I also appreciate everything that Paul brought when Rob and Colin, because it's, to me, going to be arguably the most important part of next year, is determining what does that technology look like. And I also appreciate what Dan can bring to the table with regard to facilities, and what does that look like underneath those three plans as well, will be something that I think we'll be considering. And so I liked Carl's comments to Dan on that subject. So overall, I feel walking out of this meeting to be well informed, and also look forward to what we're going to see on the 20th and a few meetings after that.
Thank you. Annette.
Thanks. First, I want to just say, wow, you know, this is a lot of information for us to take in, and you all were very thorough, and you were very thoughtful, and are willing to answer our many, many questions. And as Sarah said, you know, homework's coming back. Todd mentioned various people, everybody involved. Yvonne, Tumai, as well as the rest of your department, I know were really important parts of putting together this information, but especially you put together this information in such a way that it has so much detail. We can look at everything that we want to, but you also were able to get a high level view of what we have and give us some realistic numbers here. I realized that just as everything else is changing, our budget figures are changing, and they've already changed since you've done this report for us. But we appreciate that you put so much effort into it. I think that special ed is going to be a huge thing as well. And so I appreciate Steve's efforts, you know, to walk us through that. And he'll be bringing us back some information as well. And I also want to thank Carl, Sarah, and Trish, because that's going to be the really big next step, is how are we going to look at all of these various plans? How are we going to involve our stakeholders? And I feel like we are really trying to engage our stakeholders, and particularly our parents, with what Sarah brought up on the town hall. And I think that's what we've always been about in Carmel, is trying to make sure that we have everybody involved. And so it's the parents to give the feedback, but also we've always been really good at going out to the community in general, and also our employees. And because it's our teachers who are delivering all of this, you know, education, and our classified staff is in support of all of that. We need everybody on board to solve this. This is a tough time. And thank you for stepping up and you know, leading the charge on getting feedback, because that's going to help us as we move forward to this. It's a scary time, but I know by all of us working together and listening to one another, we will make it happen. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Annette. Tricia Dellis, you're out there, and you're obviously going to be the point person in the coordinating the efforts as we move forward. So Tricia, would you like to weigh in on any of your thoughts?
I would just, yes, thank you. I would like to commend Yvonne for her presentation as well. I think working with her in the last 10 months, I've found her to be very detailed and clear, and most importantly, very transparent. And for a CBO, that's really important, that people understand and see where the buckets are, if you will, how we call it. I would also like to highlight that the board has done a tremendous amount of work over the years to maintain the level of reserves that we will now be able to have a little bit of a cushion with. And like it has been said earlier, these are the times that comes in. And so thank you for that. I would also say I am tremendously excited to engage with the community as well as our employees as we work together in this crisis. I'm willing and ready to have those conversations and would bring in that information so that we can make the best decisions as we move forward as a team and as a family and as a district that this has always been. And lastly, there's a lot in the news, obviously, about the economy and just a tremendous amount of anxiety from our employee groups. Other districts throughout the state and certainly locally are discussing layoffs and those types of actions. And I would say that I know that the board, as well as the district, we do not want to have to do those types of things. And the fact that we have reserves and we have a jump on this piece of the budget where we could be very thoughtful as we move forward to make adjustments to keep people employed and people, you know, I know that creates a lot when families are looking at what's going to happen. So those would be my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And, you know, to summarize, you know, I kind of come off like a taskmaster on some of this stuff and adding jobs or assignments to people to report, but I want to thank you all, especially staff, district staff, for taking it in the spirit in which it was intended. which is just to try to bring more clarity and focus to where we're going and why we're getting there. So, you know, I don't have any concerns that we will not do this well. I don't. We just have way too much talent in the district. We've got quite a bit of experience, and we're going to get this right. We really are. So, Yvonne, of course, this is step one and pretty thorough. I would imagine that if there's any budget questions that might come as a result of this presentation from the community, they could be directed to you directly, because you're the one that has the answers. So on that note, thank everybody for their participation, and we are going to go ahead and move to adjournment. Okay, meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.